I'm excited too. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, everyone, to Women of the Military podcast. I'm really excited to have Kim here. We met at the Women Veteran Alliance Unconference, and I was just so inspired hearing a tiny piece of her story. She was a finalist for the Melissa A. Washington Small Business Award, and I was a finalist back in 2020. And so it was really cool to hear a little bit about what she's doing. And so I wanted to have her on the show today. So thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here. And I was inspired meeting you as well. So I'm glad that we could connect afterwards.
Yeah. So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially being, going through Veterans Day, and my brother is now in Texas with me, and he was in the Navy as well. So it kind of like makes me smile thinking about all this, because I joined the military really to take care of them. And when I say them, I mean my 3 little brothers. My youngest had lived with me on and off between my deployments once I joined, but in high school, I kind of took care of him a lot. And the last day of my high school career, I was working at the county prosecutor's office filing papers, and I get a phone call from a recruiter, and you know how the rest is history. But I could send a paycheck home to take care of my brothers, and I would have clearance and pay for college. So even though I already had a scholarship for college, why not? So I joined really to be able to provide them stability and to take care of them. I did not plan on doing 20 years, but I did 10 years. And so it's interesting why I joined, and I still hold very true to taking care of my brothers. I love that I was able to do that. I don't know. I've had the ability to meet other people who kind of joined for the same reason. So I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of responsibility for someone graduating high school to be thinking about how to take care of my siblings and how that was something that was a driving factor, and that the military was able to give you that stability that you needed so that you could, send money back and help
Right.
take care of them. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yes.
so
Yeah.
so it sounds like you kind of did it for the benefits. Did you do a lot of research in picking a career field and picking a branch, or how did that all work out?
Yeah, honestly, I did. Because I had never, I mean, it was never in my plans to join the military. I love debates, and I was high school debates, and I wanted to do that in college, and maybe one day be a prosecutor myself. But when he said he could give me a clearance, which I can use to have a career outside of the military, pay for college, and really the paycheck and yes, the benefits. Um, I didn't really understand a lot of it at first, but I told him, because he called me saying I had a really good score on my ASVAB. And so I said, well, I don't want a job where I had no idea what the Navy did. I mean, I'm from a small town in Kansas. We have bonfires on Friday night after the football game. It's kind of how I explain my, growing up to people. Um, so no idea what the Navy was like, right? Literally the center of the United States. And I wanted to, of course, find out more, but I was very adamant. I remember from the beginning telling, the recruiter, I want to do something that is kind of like intelligence. I want to do something, I guess, top secret. I don't remember necessarily saying that specifically, but doing something that requires gathering a lot of information and putting the information out and doing something like other people, not everybody gets to do. Um, but he, I also had a lot of questions, and he connected me with some female sailors, and I always wonder who that was. I should maybe try to find them, but some women who were already in the military, and I was asking them all kinds of questions, like how do you take care of yourself on a ship, and where do you buy supplies, and so looking back now, the questions I asked were so silly, but even one of the women sailors was telling my recruiter, I don't know if she's gonna do this. Because I mean, I really had no idea. And not only do you not know, but if you really don't know what you're doing, you don't really even know what questions to ask. So I asked as many questions as I could. I found out information, of course, through the trusty internet, but I wasn't supposed to leave until December. And I was like, oh, that's great. I just moved into my own house. I'm 18. I have, a good job at the prosecutor's office, and I can go to college for a little bit. I got 6 months. Well, he called and he said, hey, we got that Intel job for you, but can you leave in 12 days? And I've always said, through thick and thin, I'm so glad that I did that, because I feel like if I would have waited that 6 months to kind of like wait around, I'm pretty sure I would not have gone. I'm not a spontaneous person, but I am a very planning, strategic person. And so even like looking back now, seeing my little 18-year-old self run around, taking care of my car and this house that I just rented, I just signed a lease on, and my brother, and making sure, just putting everything in order. I had 12 days to get everything in order. So that was really my focus, and not really the focus of like, oh my gosh, I'm joining the military, right? And so I left in 12 days in June, headed out, and I'm glad that I did that, even though I was still like, to answer your question, did I know a lot about it? No, I didn't. And what I did know was not what I thought I needed to know. So, but I'm glad I did it. So.
Yeah. I think the not knowing what to ask is really something that's a challenge, because if you're not in the military community, it's like another language and you're like, I don't even know where to start, which is, that's why I wrote my book, A Girl's Guide to Military Service, because I was thinking back to when I was 18, 19, looking to join the military, and I had no idea like what questions to even ask. And so it was like people told me you should do this, and I was like, okay. And I didn't even like say, is there another option? Could I do this instead? Like,
Right.
because I went to the recruiter, I was like, I really want to get money for school. And he was like, okay, well, you have the GI Bill. But then I learned about ROTC and being able to like continue going to school and becoming an officer. But the recruiter didn't tell me that. And I had no idea that
Right.
there was like any other options. So I wanted people to have like all the information in one place. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I like the
Yes.
story of
And that's why
like,
I'm so glad you have this podcast.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say I like the story of like, you were like, if I had to wait the 6 months, I would have talked myself out of it. But since I didn't have time to think about it, it was like, it's time to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I'm glad you have this podcast, because there's just so much that I had no idea. And, everyone's experience is different. And I'm pretty sure the person I talked to, she was in like some sort of one of the engineering or like kind of trade jobs, and so completely different from Intel. I don't know why my recruiter had me talk to her, but yeah, you don't know what to ask, right? And I keep that in mind as well when people ask me what was joining the military like, or like, hey, I'm thinking about joining the military, or their child is thinking about joining the military. I do try to keep an open mind, because either one, you have no idea what the military life is like at all, or you're coming from a military family, but all you have is that perspective of being either like a military child or a military spouse, not necessarily in the military. And it is different, so I try to be as open-minded as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good way to look at it. And I bet it was probably the only female sailor that he knew. I was trying to say soldier and sailor at the same time. The only female sailor he knew. So he was like, it doesn't
Right.
matter what career field. I just like, I think it's great that he found a woman for you to talk to so that you had, someone. And
Yes.
yeah, I think that shows like that he went above and beyond
Right.
to help make you comfortable. So you had 12 days to get ready, and then it was
Yeah.
off to boot camp. And what was that experience like?
Yeah. Boot camp was interesting. Um, I was a cross country runner in high school, and I was not like state champion or anything like that. But physical endurance really wasn't a problem for me, especially, I'd work 12-hour shifts as a waitress. So being on my like physical stuff I wasn't necessarily worried about that. I was more worried about my family, and making sure they're going to be okay when I'm out here, in Chicago of all places, in the cold, where they know I hate the cold, but I luckily went during the summertime. But yeah, I tell people, just to be honest, the hardest part of dealing with boot camp was just dealing with that many women. And that, not to sound, definitely not discriminatory, but man, we are very passionate beings. And I've never been around that many at the same time, let alone in a small clustered area, and me kind of growing up a little faster than, I don't want to say most kids, because everyone grows up different, but I grew up pretty faster than I should have had to. And a lot of people always thought I was a lot more older than I was and mature for my age. But man, I remember I was there and there's like this 25-year-old and she's never drove a car. She didn't have a license. Like she'd never left home and she just struggled so much every single day. And in my mind, I was like, why are you struggling? And of course I've grown up a lot since then. Like I'm a social worker, so I see things a lot differently now. But between that and then girls that were doing things they shouldn't have been, and then girls, I say girls because we were younger, but women that did come from a military family, and some of them didn't want to be there. They just did it because their parent wanted them to. I mean, it was just so many different dynamics in one small area, and I'll jokingly tell people if the military gets brought up, I'm like, oh yeah, you can fit 80 women in this, one room. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's what boot camp's like. That's what a ship is like. So boot camp, that was the hardest part, honestly, it was a lot going on. And I just wasn't, I came from a kind of environment where I just made sure business was taken care of. And that was kind of my mindset. But I was very successful. I was in charge of laundry. So that's cool. I tried to get a higher leadership position, but I couldn't sing cadence. So they were like, no, not for you. But I was in charge of laundry and we, never got any hit on our inspection. And it sounds kind of silly, but I took like pride in that. And that was my first leadership role as an adult, really. Having other laundry petty officers is what we called them, but having, kind of helping schedule and organize laundry. Everyone always had clean laundry, and some people got their stuff washed by them, by itself instead of with everyone else's. And just like being able to manage that, I was really proud of myself. I was like, dang, look what I can do. I can do laundry in the military. But I ate 3 meals a day. I don't think I've ever done that before in my life. And so that was a change. So I actually gained weight in boot camp. But I also got to help people decrease their run time. And that was amazing. And that actually led me to really wanting to be a PT or, physical trainer. There's so many different names. CFL is what the Navy calls it, fitness leader. But I wanted to help people decrease their run time. And this girl, man, she just had so much passion. She worked so hard, and her run time went from like 18 minutes to like 12 in the 2 months we were in boot camp. And that wasn't me. I mean, that was her. But just being able to be alongside her and help her through that journey was amazing. It was, so boot camp, I mean, I didn't really cry. The only time I cried was when my little brothers sent me a letter saying they weren't coming. Because they had some 4-H thing or something, and I just bawled my eyes out. And everybody was just like, Henry's crying, like she never cries, because I was just so focused on the end result. But when they sent me that, it was just like, I'm here for you, and that was really hard. They still ended up coming, and oh my gosh, I just bawled my eyes out. That's when I really cried. But I don't know, boot camp, I'm sure people talk about the push-ups they did, or I don't know what others really say about boot camp, but for me, it was just a different dynamic and environment, never being in something like that before. But finding whatever I could to apply my strengths and go for it, and I was able to do that. And I got promoted. I got meritoriously promoted in boot camp. So I went from E1 to E2, and I thought that was pretty cool. So
yeah, I love hearing that, like, your passion for helping people. I mean, it's in your origin story, and then it's like in your boot camp story of like helping people with their run times and managing the laundry, making sure everyone, that's another job of taking care of people. And so I think that's cool. And now you're a social worker, so it's like you can see it like throughout your story. And so I think that's really neat to see that theme like just come straight to the top even from the very beginning. So that's really neat. So what was your career field? You said you wanted to do something like Intel related. Is that what you ended up in?
yeah. Yeah, so I was cryptologic technician collection, which essentially is Signals Intelligence. But it got to where I was kind of taking a lot of different types or versions or forms of intelligence and fusing it together and providing a product, which is kind of where my project management as a professional started. But I was Intel, and honestly, there's some things I did not like about it. I'm an active person, so sitting there for long periods of time, not a fan. My first deployment was in Japan. I had no idea what I was doing, to be honest. I was like a little baby 19-year-old from Kansas, and in Japan, and people that had been on, not just deployed before, but people who had been on that ship before, so they were very comfortable with the environment. I'm like, I don't know where I'm at. And never used the subway, the train. I mean, I could not figure out how to get from point A to point B, but I was there during the tsunami. I was on land during the tsunami, and I had a goal because we were only going to be there for 90 days, if that. And I wanted to get a certification, but you have to be on the ship for at least 90 days to get that. And I just, oh my gosh, I remember I just did not sleep. I look back, I'm like, how did I function? People made fun of me because I would be studying all the time, but that's okay. I got the certification. But we ended up staying, I think 93 days or something like that, because the tsunami happened, which kind of threw everything off. But we did different kinds of intel, but really doing my job, the intel that I wanted to do, or that I realized this is kind of intel I want to do, was my last deployment. And that was a 10-month deployment, my third one. And I actually like begged to go on that deployment. I was like, take me, let me be part of the team. And I did some really awesome stuff there. So it's kind of all I can say, I guess, classified wise. But
I know, it's like Intel, you can only like say so much about what you do and your job. It's kind of, it's all classified. Right. You got that clearance, and right. So, but what was it like to be on a ship and to be overseas and just to experience the world in a way that you hadn't before you joined the Navy?
Yeah. Well, first, when I left boot camp, went to Pensacola, also worked really hard, got made fun of because I was studying all the time, but I finished the top of my class. And I did that so I could pick where I went, and I picked Hawaii. And I'm pretty sure everyone else in my class went to like straight to a ship or like Bahrain or something for their first tour. I think one other guy got like a special ops tour he wanted, which was cool. But I'm so glad, because otherwise I would not have had cool orders. But I was able to go to an advanced school here in Texas, where I'm actually am now, and then Hawaii. And even Hawaii was a huge adjustment. And I remember like the table I was sitting at, the people, I think it was a chief sitting there staring at me like, make your choice. But I mean, it's a life altering choice for me. And I could go to Colorado, or I could go to Hawaii. So I could be right next to my home state, or I could be across an ocean. And man, I was like, well, I joined the Navy to take care of my family, but I'm doing this for me. Like, I'm going to make this one decision for myself. And that was to go to Hawaii. And I'm so glad I did. It was a great experience. I was never permanently stationed on a ship. I was what they call direct support, so temporarily assigned. So essentially, hey, this ship is going out. We need you to go with it. And man, it was an experience. The first deployment, like I said, being in Japan during the tsunami. I have a funny story if I can share with you real quick.
Yeah.
I was on land when the tsunami happened. I don't even know how far we were. We're in Yokosuka. So, I mean, we're just feeling aftershocks. But remember I said I hadn't slept a lot, and I was on the phone with my mom, and the phone's cut out because you're obviously across overseas. And the lights were like swaying. And I was like, why are these lights swaying? Like, man, I really need to get some sleep, because nobody was moving. We're all like in this more MWR building where there's like TVs and game boxes and whatever else, and pool tables. And so, but I was like, am I the only one seeing these lights move? And my mom was like, you really need to get some sleep. And I was like, yeah, probably. Well, the line went dead. I was like, oh man, I just need to go to bed. But I turned, and it's like the movie The Day After Tomorrow, or one of those other crazy movies. Like, everyone just slowly stood up, and we're all like looking at each other, and we slowly walk out. Looking back now, it just creeps me out. But we walk outside. There's like a bridge swaying. There's like a line, something flying in the air down the pier. I don't know what's going on. I'm just like, oh, I better go back to my ship. So I walk to my ship, and I just go up the brow, which is like the bridge essentially to the ship from the pier. And they were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, why? Like, I don't know what's going on. I think I'm just tired." Not realizing that I'm in the middle of like an earthquake or an aftershock. And they were like, "Well, we're not even attached to the pier." I was like, "What?" I had walked the brow, but somehow one of our lines snapped. And I still don't know how that happened, but the water level dropped so much. It still like amazes me because our ropes or lines, but ropes, what normal people call them, are like insanely strong. So I didn't realize what I saw fly in the air, I guess, was one of our lines. So we were attached, but there was one line that wasn't attached. I'm just walking up the brow, no biggie. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And they're like, "Well, we just had an aftershock." And I was like, "Oh, is that what that was?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I remember their way they're looking at me. I was like, "Oh, I'm from Kansas and we have tornadoes. And you don't really see those coming until right last minute, but at least you see them." Oh man, they did not let me. I have brown hair. They called me Dorothy. They did not let me live that down. I was so embarrassed as soon as it came out. I was like, "Oh, I probably shouldn't have said that." So they jokingly call me Dorothy the rest of my time, and are like, "Where's Toto?" Um, Ironically, I do have a dog with me all the time now, my service dog. But uh, yeah, I mean, I just had no idea, and I left the ship because they were shutting down the base, and I don't want to get stuck on base. And the next day, we got recalled back to the ship. We did recovery for the next 2 weeks. Went through a radiation cloud. I mean, it just like blew my mind. I had never been a part of something like that. I've done like tornado help, disaster help and stuff, but not collected cans and coats for people after Hurricane Katrina, as a middle schooler. But man, I had never like really seen something like that. So, um, essentially all that to say that was my first experience, and it was whew. But the other two deployments were in the Gulf, where everything's always crazy, and we did some stuff in the Red Sea on my second deployment. That was 8 months, and the third deployment was, like I said, 10 months in the Carl Vinson. But being out to sea, like, there's nothing like it. And I think someone just recently asked me to go on a cruise, so I might get emotional here, but I just don't. I don't want to. And I was realizing as I was explaining, talking to them about being on a ship or whatever, I was like, I don't think you'll ever get as awesome as what it's like. I mean, being on a Navy ship. And I know that there's a lot of crap that sucks being on a Navy ship. Sometimes we have pineapple the color of like the sun, or sometimes we have boiled eggs that actually aren't boiled. Like, the food can be crappy sometimes. You don't get to see your family. You don't get Wi-Fi in the middle of the ocean. There's things that are suck about it, but to watch aircraft like take off and land on a ship, even though we've been doing it for decades now, like, it still blows my mind. And to see the missions that we're doing, to see the technology that we have, to see the amount, the grit that people in the Navy, that certain job that, I mean, I think all jobs have, but to see the dynamic, it's, you really can't, I don't know anywhere else in the world where you can do something like that, and, being on a ship, it's very hard to put into words. I miss it sometimes. There's times I'm like, I don't miss it, especially my second deployment, because I was not prepared for 8 months. I thought I was going to be there for a month. And so I mentally prepared for 3 months and stayed the full 8. That was not good. But the third deployment, when you mentally prepare yourself, okay, this is 10 months deployment. Pretty much the next year of my life revolves around this ship, this deployment. Like, you adapt and make it your home. And I mean, it can be an amazing experience. I taught country two-step lessons on the ship, did workout classes. My second deployment, Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting happened, and we did a workout memorial for them and sent them the flag from the ship. I don't know. I mean, you're really like a floating city, and you're all you got. You ain't got Walmart. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have Wi-Fi. Like, what's there is what you got, and it's what you make it. And there's some people who don't make it well for themselves, but it's just an incredible experience. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so hearing you talk about the Navy, you got out at 10 years. What led you to decide to leave the military?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. I went from E1 to E6 in 6 years. I was exhausted. And in Intel, you can promote pretty fast. I did get meritoriously promoted from E5 to E6, and I say that to say, like, I was just exhausted, and I experienced some trauma, unfortunately, while I was in. Partially, the journals that I wrote are partially motivated by um, that journey, and some retaliation that I experienced. Um, I had my own like childhood trauma, I guess I could say, that I joining the military, I was very naive, and not saying you go and you're going to get hurt, but just like I thought everyone was proud to wear a uniform. I thought everyone understood the significance of wearing a Navy uniform, your dress whites, which is what people were wearing at Pearl Harbor. Do you know what I mean? Like, and not everyone has that mindset. And I was so passionate, and it impacted how I communicated with people. And there were times, like my first couple years in the Navy, I was very direct and very like, I don't have time for you type of mentality and attitude. And I never understood like why people would say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I really didn't get it until like I realized like, oh, I'm talking to people like they're ignorant, but they're not. It's just that in my mind, I already have a decision. I already have a plan. I already know what I'm doing. Like, I don't need your help type thing, right? And that would come out the wrong way. I had to do a lot of soul searching, but I was growing. I mean, I went through that phase, that process where I learned that, and grew as an adult and as a person and a sailor. But at the same time, I mean, I was in roles where I was in charge of people that were like twice my age and have been in twice as long. One person was in that I was in charge of one time. He was in the Navy for longer than I had been alive at that point. Like it was very difficult. I didn't want to be in that position, and I would see these like awesome sailors get out at 10 and 12 years. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? You're halfway to retirement. Like, you're number one sailor. You're sailor of the year. Like, oh, da, da. And then I was like, oh, because you're tired. Because I got to that point. I got to my 9-10 year mark. And I had kind of really just experienced burnout. And that part of that is on me. I say competency is rewarded with more work, and I'm, sure there are people that would disagree with me, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that would agree. But I was tired, and I did an instructor duty in the town that I'm in now, and I had my brother was 12 and he was living with me. I recently married the person I was technically my high school sweetheart, but when I joined the Navy, we went our separate ways and reconnected. That's a whole nother podcast story. But I was pregnant with my son, and I was really debating, like, do I want to leave? I've always wanted to be a mom, and I knew I could not be the sailor that I wanted to be and be the mom that I wanted to be. And there are parents that do it. There are moms, grandmas that do it, grandpas. And I mean, kudos to them. Like I could not be both. And my nieces were placed with me. And since then I've adopted them, but it was time for me to transfer, and they were going to send me to Japan. Like, it's the one place I didn't want to go, because I was like, I never want to go back. Like when we got back from recovery, it was like a ghost town. There's like tumbleweeds going across the road. I just never wanted to go back to Japan. I was terrified, but they were going to send me back, and they were like, well, you've been here for almost 4 years. Like, it's time for you to deploy. And I said, well, I understand that, but I need to adopt my nieces. Like, I have to stay in Texas. At that point, I did have like custody of them from the state, but the Navy, they're not technically dependents, if that makes sense. And so in the Navy's eyes, it's like, well, you got one kid and you have a parenting plan, like figure it out. And I was starting to realize they're not going to let me stay here until the adoption's finalized. And it just felt like, yes, the trauma I faced, the retaliation I faced, like that was still with me and I was still experiencing like impacts from that. But I was also just exhausted, and it was like I felt like I haven't lost a limb. I've never shot anybody. I've, never killed anyone. I haven't had to watch a buddy die. Like I haven't had some of those stereotypical veteran experiences. But I felt that I had given, like, I was just exhausted. I felt like I had given so much, and all I wanted to do was stay in Texas another 6 months to a year to adopt my nieces, and it wasn't going to happen. And so I was like, well, there's a job opening up on base for a full-time victim advocate. I'm already pursuing my social work degree. It's what I want to do. I love being an advocate, and well, let me apply for it. And I got the job, and I was like, well, I guess I'm getting out. And so I got out, and I transitioned into that role on base a month later. It was not an easy decision. It was in 2019, and I still have people that will find me on Facebook, and they're like, oh my gosh, you got out. You were going to be in forever. Like you're going to be the first female this or that. And I just kind of like, that's really like, thank you. That's very nice. But no, I'm not. And so it's interesting that it still shocks some people that I got out.
But it sounds like the Navy.
I didn't want to wait another 10 years.
It sounds like the Navy was.
I didn't want to wait another 10 years to start my career as a social worker. But go ahead.
But it sounds like the Navy wasn't really supporting your like family situation and the things that you had going on where you needed that time. And it's not, I mean, some people try and like, I don't think it actually, I mean, I guess there's a stereotype for a reason, but like, it wasn't like you were trying to like get out of deploying. You had deployed 3 times. You just like at that period of your life, you needed that stability. And the Navy was like, well, this is what we need. And it was like, it was almost like they forced your hand in a situation that was really tough and didn't provide that support that you needed. You talked a little about trauma and retaliation, so that probably like just added to it, because instead of getting support when you're like, well, this is what my family life is like, they were like, we don't care. You have a family care plan. You should be able to use it, instead of like, you're not listening, like, this is a unique situation. I need to get this figured out, and then I'll be ready. And like, you are tired, but I think that also like added to it, where you're like, I feel like sometimes families aren't heard, and like the military is like, well, you're just a person. It's like, no, there's more to it than that. And I need, my family needs to be supported, and I need this time to figure these things out so that I can support my family and figure out the future. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for non-traditional families, it adds that different layer, that different element. Because I was also filing for divorce, because I was in an abusive relationship and wanted to get out, and I was not going to have a baby in an environment like that. And I had some challenges because I was teaching both the day class and the night class. I was just exhausted and had an issue with one of the classes that I was in as a co-instructor, and I remember them, kind of yelling at me, actually saying, you don't want to ask for help. You never want to ask for help. Like, you think you're too proud, or you're too good to ask for help. And I like did not understand that. I was like, what do you mean? Like, how are you going to help me? And then that same day my chain of command was in my front yard, with CPS there, because I was my brother and my nieces were being placed with me, and obviously there's people in my family that were not happy about that, so there was a scene, and so you had just stood in my front yard and watched this unfold. You didn't offer to take my kids away from the situation, or get them food, or take care of my dogs, or like, you kind of just stood there for 3 hours. And so you watched that unfold, and then 3 months later, now my son's born, and I'm asking you to like please help, and I just don't feel like they fought hard enough for me to stay. But it's also hard to say that because I'm one person. In the military, I'm replaceable, right? In the military, everyone's got a situation. So I hate sounding like my situation was more important, because it wasn't. I felt that I was not getting that, like you said, the support that I needed at that time in my unique situation. Right. And it's like, well, I guess I'm getting out, So.
Yeah. The interview, like, too, before this the 4 years, like 2 weeks ago. It was about, now I'm forgetting her name. I remember her story, but I was like, on the spot, I can't figure it out. But she had deployed multiple times, and her mom would watch her kids because her husband was also deployed. And something happened. Her mom had a mental health issue, and she had to come home and take care of her kids. And then she got forced out of the military because she didn't have her family care plan. And it was like a unique situation. She had deployed multiple times. Her mom had taken, and she just needed that time and space to figure out the next step. And they were unwilling to work with her and kind of penalized her for something where it was not her fault. It's life happens. And I think that's, like you said, the military, like, you're replaceable, but in today's military, nobody, I think, is replaceable because, we don't have, because people have been treated not so nicely for so long, and now people don't want to stay because they're advocating more for themselves, and they have these unique challenges. And in the past, the military could say, "Well, we don't care," but I think things are changing. I know with
Right.
podcasts and the internet, like, the world is changing, and the military needs to change with you. And I mean, you just talked about, like, they were there and they did nothing, but then when you needed help, they did
Mhm.
nothing again. So it's like you have to actually, you can't just say you never ask for help if you don't take steps to help your people. So, yeah. So
Right. And
I
that's
don't want
why,
to
like, even my
go ahead.
business, we do strategic planning. Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Well, I was just saying, like, I tell people we do person strategic planning. Like, we put people first because you can, you can go fight this mission, but if your people with whatever technology and computers you want to use, but you have to take care of your people, and my advocacy comes from my personal experiences, but also things that I've witnessed. And if anyone's thinking about listening to this podcast, thinking about joining the military, don't be scared because of what might happen, right? We never know what's going to happen in our lives, but you just have to advocate for yourself. In the Navy, they always said, nobody cares about your career more than you. So you keep track of all your records, all your documentation, all your papers, all your evaluations. And one day I was like, wait, I was like, why is it that nobody cares about your career more than you? Like, really, the saying should be nobody cares about you more than you, and you have to advocate for yourself, and and get the resources that you need and not stop, but keep working to try to get those resources and that support.
Yeah. That was a good segue because I want to make sure we don't run out of time so that we can talk about what you're doing today and how you're helping people and your wellness journals and how those help individuals. So, what are you doing today?
Yeah, so I am a licensed social worker. I finished my master's and got my license in social work in Texas. And I was a federal employee as a full-time victim advocate at Goodfellow Air Force Base for a couple of years. But I resigned from that position and ultimately started my own business called the Gold Beacon. Gold stands for Grant Management Organization, Learning and Development. And right now we're kind of in this transition phase. I think when this podcast comes out, we'll be done with that transition. But essentially, we were just focused on building sustainable nonprofits. As a social worker, I don't do one-on-one work anymore. I want to fix the policies and the programs or help develop them. So the people that are doing the one-on-one work, the organizations, the nonprofits, the programs that are out there serving people are able to have the resources they need. So that's what the Gold Beacon does, but we've started to branch out into for-profit work and government work because we are a for-profit company, but really any organization that wants to be a part of social change, which you might have heard change management. We do a lot of change management work. If you want to be a part of social change, like, we will help you get there. We don't do a business plan, but we'll do a person first strategic plan, and we'll help fill those gaps. Yes, we'll work on your funding, your growth, figure out why your board cannot work together. But we do grants. I get that question all the time. We do write grants. But for a lot of times we don't write a grant for a client until their organization is up to par, and we help them get it there. Because my goal is if you're a great sustainable organization, like, I can't fight all of the world's battles, right? And I'm limited as a person and as a team. But if we can help build your organization so you can keep going out there and fighting the good fight, then like, what can we do for you, right? And so I do that. I have my 3 kiddos, my son and my 2 my girls that I adopted. We live in a small little town in West Texas, and I do a lot of volunteer work. I fight for advocacy, or I fight for, accessibility and disability rights on a local scale right now. ADA compliance and accessibility. I have a service dog, which, being a woman with a service dog, especially one that doesn't look like anything is wrong with you, is not very difficult. But I've also seen other accessibility, not even challenges, but accessibility situations where people are excluded because they are not accommodated to, or because they have to do all of the accommodations around other people instead of being accommodated. And so I stay pretty busy, but I like staying busy, and I like playing. I like participating. I don't have to be in charge. I just want to participate, right? So I like being able to participate and engage.
I love what you're doing. It sounds like such a great program and something that probably I need to look into for my business, just to get some direction and help. It just sounds like what you're doing is so important and so valuable. And then you didn't even talk about your wellness journal, so now I'm gonna make you talk about them again, because you launched those in October, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what are those, and why did you create them?
Yes. So I'm glad you say journals, because I tell people it's not a book, and I'm not there yet. I have not wrote a book yet, but I did some written therapy and like writing exposure therapy, and you kind of relive a specific situation, a traumatic situation or experience, but you do it through writing, and you have to do it over like 6 weeks, and there's a process. And there are like 3 things in that 6-week process that I was like, oh, this is why I think of things this way. Like, I mean, just epiphanies. But you can't. I was like, can I type? And she's like, no, you have to write. I was like, I type fast. And she's like, exactly. So you have to write it out, because it forces you to process what you're writing, right? And because you write slower than you do type. And so, and there's an emotion connected to it. It's a whole science. But it really helped with a certain situation that I experienced, actually the retaliation experience, part of that. And so I was like, man, I would love, like I said, I can't save the world. I can't change everything in the world. Like, I'm doing my part that I can do. But there's like no journals for women veterans who've experienced trauma. There's all these classes, there's these therapy sessions, there's these support groups. And I, never thought I'd be a published author. I did self-publish the journals, but I started with a 12-week empowerment journal. I call it an empowerment journal because there are gratitude journals, and yes, we have affirmations in my journal. But it's an empowerment journal because it's 12 weeks, and it's 3 questions each week, plus some reflection and an affirmation. And it starts off pretty easy. Like, what do you like about being a woman veteran or being in the military? But as you progress through the weeks, it gets more and more difficult, more and more emotional, and harder questions to answer. But it's to empower you, and it's to help you process that journey, but do it on your own, and do it in a safe place where you feel safe. Do it where it's private. You don't have to go into a clinic. Do it. It's do it how you want to do it. And I tell people, if it takes you 12 weeks, or it takes you 12 months, or 12 days, that'd probably be too short. But like, if it take however long it takes you, process it at your own rates. Like, everybody's trauma is different. Everybody's experience, everybody's recovery is different. There's great science that has great practices that are evidence and research based, but you more than anybody else, right? So use this journal as a tool. But as I was writing it, I was like, well, I have these other questions I can ask too. And since I say violence does not discriminate, this journal, I did the second one pretty quickly after that, and it's for anyone who's experienced interpersonal violence. So it's a series called Warriors Paths to Healing. And by the time that this, I think, comes out in the next few weeks, I'll have another one, the third one in the series. The first one, Warriors Path to Healing, is the 12-week empowerment journal for veterans, women veterans who've experienced trauma. The second one is for, again, Warriors Path to Healing, but to anyone who's experienced intimate partner violence. And the third one is going to be a teen and an adult version of basically the kid who had to grow up too fast. And I get to bring my daughter in on that one. And so I'm super excited about that. She's like 13 and like, I'm going to have my name on a book. So we're working on that right now. That's taken a little bit longer because there are two versions and I'm being sensitive with my daughter. But yeah, so again, Warriors Path to Healing is the name of the series. But I made it just to be a tool. And so.
It sounds like a great tool, and I think we were talking at the social at the end of the Women Veteran Alliance Unconference about like the writing aspect, and you and another person were there were talking about like the importance of writing handwriting and not just typing. And I, as a person who types a lot and writes a lot, I was like, it's kind of interesting. I didn't realize like how important it is to use a pencil and pen to write out your story. And so it's been something that I've been working on to share my story in a new way and to process it. So yeah.
Okay.
So
good.
But
okay, I love that. Well, good.
I love the work that you're doing, and I love that I got to hear some of your story about being in the Navy. But I always like to end the interview with, what advice would you give to young women who are considering joining the military?
What advice I would give to young women, or really anyone considering joining the military, is to do some self-exploration and not going super deep. You don't have to, go through a new therapy session or go do some yoga. Just really explore what's important to you and what your values are, and because it will help you set your boundaries, and it'll help you say, I'm not going to be the person that's doing 19 other people's work, or I'm not going to take this, I want to do this job and not this one. And fight for yourself and say, I want to go to Hawaii, So I guess to make it a quick, easy answer is just really explore yourself. What is important to you? And write it out. You can write on paper. I'm all about writing stuff on paper, but write out what is important to you. What is your interest? Like, what are your interests and what are your values? Like, what are your core values and why? And that will help. I think, you can still join, but you're joining on a little bit more solid foundation and even if you're naive or scared or think you got it, in the bag and you have no problem, you still have something you can always come back to that is you, and that is at the center of your core. And so that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I started out the Girl's Guide to Military Service with the why, because I felt like I wanted to join the military, but I didn't really know why, and I didn't think a lot about why I was joining. And I think if I had spent a lot of time with that self-reflection of thinking like, what do I want to get out of this? Why am I doing it? Like, what's drawing me? It would help me like not only in figuring out what job I should do, but also like when it was time to get out, I hope that it helps like with the transition. If you can build this strong foundation, knowing what you want to get out of the military, and then it's like, did I get everything I wanted? Yes, check the box, and it's easier to walk away from leaving. So I think that's a great answer. I'm right on board with you in that exact way. So thank you so much for sharing your story and for the work that you're doing to help women veterans and all the people who have experienced trauma with your journals. I think that's so important, and with your company. So much good stuff. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I appreciate for you allowing me to be on here. And if anyone reaches out to you about me, feel free to share my contact information. I've directed some people towards your direction as well. But if anyone's listening and ever just needs help or has a question, like, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be there to help you, support you.
Yeah. So, and all your contact information is in the show notes. So if people want to reach out to you, they can get the journals and your website. Everything is there so that they can find it easily. So thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.